All right, then let's get started. Welcome everyone. I'm Em. I'm one of the librarians here at Rockland Public Library, and we're so thrilled to be hosting tonight's Camden Conference community event. I want to start the night off with a brief land acknowledgement. Though we're meeting digitally over Zoom, we here at the library are gathered on Wabanaki land. And I'm happy to turn it over to Bill, who will be introducing the Camden Conference and tonight's speaker. He is a member of the Camden Conference Events Committee. And Bill, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you, Em. My name is Bill Bachhoffner, and on behalf of the Camden Conference, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's program. We would like to thank Rockland Public Library and the Friends of the Rockland Public Library for making these programs possible. The Camden Conference is a nonprofit, nonpartisan citizens forum driven almost exclusively by volunteers from our community. The mission of the Camden Conference is to foster informed discourse on world issues. In keeping with our mission, we offer a series of community events leading up to our annual weekend conference. These free events are intended to provide background on the yearly topic and to touch on areas related to the February conference that may not be covered in its three-day format. The views, opinions, and positions expressed by our presenters are theirs alone and do not necessarily reflect those of the Camden Conference. This year's conference is our 35th. It's entitled Europe, Challenged at Home and Abroad, and will take place February 25th through the 27th, 2022. And we hope live from the historic Camden Opera House, COVID protocols allowing. Tonight, as part of the conference community events series, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Joseph W. McDonnell. Professor McDonnell is a professor of public policy and management at the Edmund S. Muskie School of Public Service at the University of Southern Maine. And he has observed and visited China many times over the past 20 years. In 2013, he secured a Confucius Institute for USM and served as its director until 2018. Dr. McDonnell has authored articles on China that have appeared in the Portland Press Herald and the Bangor Daily News. He came to Maine in 2011 to serve as Dean of the Professional Schools at USM and subsequently also serve as USM Provost. Prior to coming to Maine, Dr. McDonnell served as Dean of the Business School of Stony Brook University in New York. So Dr. McDonnell will attempt to untangle the strained relationships between the United States, Europe, and China in his presentation this evening. Dr. McDonnell, welcome.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Em. So there are so many new events that are happening every day in the relationship between the United States and Europe, and between the United States and China, and between Europe and China, as well as in the triangular relationship involving all three. And so over the next half hour or so, I will try to offer some background and perspective on these relationships. We might look at these as a three-legged stool, but with two legs, the United States leg and the China leg, with their large economies and militaries as more powerful than the third European leg. Europe may be seen as the leg between these two giants, the US and China, each wooing Europe to its side. But sometimes we see Europe on the periphery now that the US has pivoted toward Asia. At times, Europe may feel left out, but it has an important role to play in the contentious relationship between the US and China. The US and China and the EU all have significant and somewhat similar domestic challenges involving economic inequality, minority populations, and serious energy and climate change issues And all these issues have implications for their relationship with each other. Let's start with the United States. And I'd like to begin the story with former President Donald Trump, because it is really his stance against Europe and China that disrupted long-standing relationships and have raised the question about whether these strained relationships can be repaired or will be exacerbated in the future. President Trump's America First foreign policy was a reaction to the internationalism of the Bush and Obama administrations in several ways. First, it opposed the multi-decade wars in the Middle East. Second, it opposed globalization that had exported US manufacturing and other blue-collar jobs. And Trump viewed globalization as an accommodation to China. And third, it opposed immigration that made the country more diverse, less white, less Christian, and less European in its origin. And fourth, it opposed multi-country alliances and international organizations. And even though Mr. Trump is no longer in office, his agenda in one way or the other colors the Biden administration policies and our strained relationship with Europe and China. President Biden's major challenges are well known: ending the pandemic, managing the flood of people seeking entry at the southern border, passing the infrastructure and the Build Back Better bills, both are responses to economic inequality and climate change, and managing the headwinds of supply shortages that are disrupting the economy and driving up prices and inflation. President Biden has said that his agenda is designed to demonstrate to the world that democracy can work. When he makes that statement, it is often in reference to China and Russia and other authoritarian countries who are claiming the superiority of their systems. But the threat to democracy comes from within the United States: domestic terrorism and efforts to undermine elections measured that were fueled by the former president. The Biden administration's stance towards China thus far has not been much warmer than Trump's hard line. But our relationship with China remains three-pronged: as a partner, as a competitor, and as an adversary. And we have to keep in mind all three relationships and try to keep them in balance, even though all of them are strained. Despite contentious rhetoric, China remains the US largest trading partner. Last year, we imported $435 billion of goods from China, and we exported $125 billion of goods and services. The Biden administration just announced this week that we will keep in place the Trump tariffs against China, even though that administration knows the tariffs proved costly to the American consumers, businesses, and farmers, and have not resulted in any significant shift in China's policies. But public opinion and bipartisan sentiment against China give the administration little room to lift the tariffs or move away from the Trump agreement. And under that agreement, China was expected to import more American products, and thus far, China has not met the terms of phase one of that agreement. The Biden administration did reach an agreement with Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei CFO, to send her back to China, which demonstrated goodwill, and that will pave the way, or at least may pave the way, for talks on trade and Taiwan. Now, turning to Europe, the US and Europe became estranged when President Trump labeled Europe an adversary, imposed tariffs on some of its products, prodded the Europeans to contribute more to their defense and threatened to pull the US out of NATO. Biden has sought to repair the transatlantic relationship, but has been accused by the Europeans of being as unilateral as Trump. The Europeans felt left out of the decision-making over the exit from Afghanistan and over the recently announced US, Great Britain, Australian partnership. And that partnership will build nuclear submarines for Australia to counter China's Navy in the South China Sea, but it also terminated France's contract with Australia to build conventional submarines. This announcement led France to recall its ambassador from the United States, hardly the bridge building that the Europeans expected from a Biden administration. Trump's rupture of the US-EU relationship has frayed their longstanding bond. While once Europe thought it could always count on America's support, now there is doubt. Was Trump's 4 years in office an aberration, or will he or someone like him lead America in 2024? The recent past and the unknown future have planted the seeds of doubt in the minds of Europeans, and the credibility of the US in the eyes of the Europeans has been damaged, which makes it difficult for Biden to bring the European allies along. While the US bonds with Europe have been frayed, they remain unbroken. The United States and Europe just agreed in late September to deepen transatlantic cooperation, to strengthen semiconductor supply chains, curb China's trade practices, and take a more unified approach towards regulating big global technology firms. In a joint statement about China, but I have to say, without mentioning the word China, the US and the EU said, we stand together in continuing to protect our businesses, consumers, and workers from unfair trade practices, in particular, those posed by non-market economies that are undermining the world trading system. So in no uncertain terms, that implied China. Now, turning specifically to China, let's start with a historical perspective. In 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, America enjoyed economic and military dominance throughout the world. Since then, we have gone through the 9/11 attack, 2 long Middle East wars, the financial collapse of '09, the American First policy that weakened our ties to our allies, racial unrest, a backlash against immigration, floods in the South, forest fires in the West, the failure to manage the COVID-19 pandemic, and democracy shaken by a presidential election with the loser claiming fraud and his supporters storming the country's capital in an insurrection. China looks at these events and sees the East rising and the West in decline, and its democratic form of government in disarray. Xi Jinping has said that by 2035, China could be the top technological, economic, and military country in the world. He wants to convince other countries that China's rise is inevitable, to encourage them to come into its orbit on China's terms. If he can successfully convince enough countries, Xi's prediction about China's inevitable dominance may, in fact, come to pass. Eventually, China's economy ought to be twice the size of the US economy, given its population that is 4 times the size of the United States. As one commentator put it, China's rise happened so fast that we have not yet had time to be astonished. China has ushered in a new era of economic and military competition with the US. The big question is whether this will lead to war or a peaceful rivalry. Earlier this week, China sent 56 fighter jets into Taiwan, into their airspace in a show of force, and from Taiwan's perspective, an act of intimidation and provocation. President Xi Jinping has promoted an aggressive nationalism that has challenged the international order. And in that sense, he has been similar to President Trump. China initiated its China 2025 program to achieve 70% self-sufficiency in high-tech industries. By 2049, the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, it seeks a dominant position in global markets in all of these industries. In addition to moving to high-tech, value-oriented products of the future, China is working to gain better control of its supply chain to become self-sufficient by growing domestic industries like semiconductors, rather than relying on foreigners for these key products. China's aggressive push into these future-oriented high-tech industries has woken up the United States and Europe to the competitive threat from China. The Chinese government has supported these key industries, which gives them an uncompetitive advantage or a competitive advantage in global markets. Thus far, the US and Europe have not been successful in changing this practice, and it's unlikely they will be successful in the future, which may force the US and Europe to also invest in industries of the future to stay competitive. China's Belt and Road Initiative, its aggressive investment in many emerging economies in Asia, Africa, and Central Europe, aims to expand China's reach by funding infrastructure projects in these countries. On the one hand, China is building an extensive outreach with these emerging economies, but there's also some backlash as many poorer countries have had to give up valuable ports or other assets and ended up with debt that they cannot afford. Next year, President Xi will likely be given an unprecedented third five-year term. The change to the Constitution of China to eliminate term limits has already taken place. But even an authoritarian leader like Xi needs to deliver for his society. And for a communist society dedicated to socialism like China, there's a lot of economic inequality in China that Xi is seeking to address. He has taken steps to end the Gilded Age in China and to address inequality. But unlike the issues, and this is not unlike the issues that are facing the US and Europe. And so all three areas, the two countries in Europe, agree to that this is a major problem for them. Xi has cracked down on billionaires, especially in high-tech companies. But in doing so, he has made loyalty to the government a higher priority than innovation and business development. Xi has sought to have greater control over business and has favored state-controlled companies, but these are the least productive segments of the Chinese economy. Xi could fund greater social programs to make the society more egalitarian by selling state-owned companies and encouraging private enterprise, but that would make the country more capitalistic and less under state control, a trade-off that he has been thus far unwilling to make. And Xi has made a calculation that he's willing to slow the growth of these hugely successful companies like Alibaba and Tencent because he fears they have become too powerful. And in that, the United States, China, and Europe are all in agreement that the world's big tech companies have become too powerful, not only economically, but in their capacity to shape public opinion. Today, China faces major headwinds, not just from the actions taken by these tech firms. The Chinese economy is slowing. Car sales have slowed, real estate sales have slowed, industrial production has slowed, all indicators of a slowing economy. Its economy is not in recession, but growing at a slower pace than the past. China's economy needs to grow faster than developed economies to allow China to break out of its middle income trap with the per capita income now stuck at about $12,000 per year. Ever since the 2009 financial recession, worldwide recession, when Western economies stopped buying Chinese exports, China had made a shift from a dominant exporter of its manufactured goods to become a more consumer-oriented, service-oriented society with less dependency on Western countries to buy its products. But China needs a population that can afford consumer goods and services. So the challenge is lifting up this per capita income, getting more people out of poverty and into the middle class. But there are lots of headwinds for China to do this. China's debt is a major headwind. Simply put, the country has too much debt. The interest alone on debt has grown to double the value of its GDP growth, and total debt is nearly 300% of GDP. Regulators have tightened the requirements to curb easy credit, but we are seeing a rise in defaults on the debt as well. China's demographics are another headwind. China's working population is shrinking as the society ages. China ended its one-child policy, but that has not convinced this generation of young people to have more children. Today, 8 workers support 1 retiree. In 2050, it is projected that there will be 2 workers supporting 1 retiree. China's heavy reliance on real estate represents yet another headwind. Housing has slowed because young people cannot afford the price of housing. And those able to buy have become concerned about potential bankruptcies of those development companies, the builders of these high rises that people live in. The large Chinese real estate company, Evergrande, has $300 billion in debt and teeters on the brink of bankruptcy. China does not want to bail out the company because it sends exactly the wrong signal about curbing debt. But it also does not want Evergrande doesn't want its failure to trigger a contagion in the economy. And to complicate matters, many ordinary Chinese people have already purchased and made down payments and taken out mortgages on these half-built properties and now looking to the government to protect their investment. The US and Western countries have provided a tailwind to China's economy by purchasing Chinese goods, but China may not see that tailwind in the future as the US and Europe bring more manufacturing back to their shores. China's dependence on Western importers of Chinese goods might become a headwind if indeed they slow down their purchases. China also has the challenge of cleaning up its environment without slowing down its economy. But the pressure to grow the economy has always trumped China's interest in environmental protection. Right now, China has an energy shortage, in part from its efforts to clean the environment, but also the shortages and the price increases in coal and natural gas. 60% of China's electricity comes from coal. With price spikes and shortages, there will be an increase in the cost of Chinese products, which will increase the cost of goods purchased from China and contribute to rising inflation throughout the world. China's largest headwind outside of the country is world public opinion. The Pew Research Center polling last year reported soaring unfavorable opinions of China, double-digit increases in unfavorable feelings from just a year earlier. In the United States, 67% of those surveyed expressed unfavorable views of China. In Europe, 71%. In Japan, 86%. And in South Korea, 76%. Now, China's role in originating the COVID-19 pandemic may be the leading factor that's shifting public opinion, but human rights and governance have emerged as critical issues, especially the treatment of the minority Muslim Uyghurs in Xinjiang, the arrests of democracy advocates in Hong Kong, and the threat of the invasion of Taiwan. Previously, the United States and Europe focused on their common interests with China and downplayed differences with the autocratic regime. But there's clearly been a shift, with 70% of Americans saying we should focus on human rights over economic interests. And except for a few EU countries in Central Europe, the EU has extremely negative views of China's human rights record. Until recently, China has successfully flexed its economic muscle to keep the focus on investment and trade and away from its internal affairs. But its economic policies have also engendered resentment, and it extracted a heavy price from foreign companies doing business in China. It failed to respect intellectual property rights, and it put its thumb on the scale to favor Chinese companies over foreign competitors. So today, the US and the EU are looking for a more reciprocal relationship with China in light of the strength of its economy. China has recently sought membership in the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. This is the alliance that President Obama created to gain leverage on China, but the US never joined. And member companies may demand too much of China for it to gain admission, but it is ironic that China would seek admission to an organization designed to gain leverage against it. And the request by China raises questions in the US and the EU as to whether they ought to join or have some partnership in Asia. Now, turning back to Europe, just a brief glance at its domestic challenges. The EU is a coalition of 27 countries with a common currency, but also disparate country by country issues that do not always align with each other. Germany, for instance, has a bigger financial interest in trade with China than any other country. Northern Europe has a decidedly negative view of relations with China, while Central Europe has a more positive view than other parts of Europe. Hungary, Poland, and Slovenia are illiberal democracies that have rolled back checks and balances, free media, judicial independence, and economic competition. The rise of authoritarian leaders in these countries has come, at least in part, as a reaction to immigration. The loss of Great Britain with Brexit weakened the EU's unity, and the loss of Angela Merkel leaves a leadership vacuum in the EU. And the German election of just last week points to a three-party coalition in Germany, and it's unlikely to produce a strong European leader. France's President Emmanuel Macron faces an election in April. And if Europe is overwhelmed with migrants again from Afghanistan and other dysfunctional countries, France risks the election of Marine Le Pen the far-right candidate, and Italy may also see a challenge from the right in its next election. Human migration into Europe may be the continent's biggest challenge as Europe struggles to integrate immigrants without losing its identity. But a close second is its shortage of energy and its growing dependence on Russia for natural gas. In an effort to improve ties with Germany, the US waived sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, and Russia now has gained power over Europe's energy supply, which is a dangerous position for Europe and its relationship with the United States. In the Cold War, Europe lived between two world powers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Now, the world's third largest economy finds itself again between two world economic and military powers, the United States and China. The European countries and the United States forged a strong bond in the aftermath of World War II and the subsequent Cold War in Europe, as Europe sought protection from Soviet advances. President Kennedy's 1963 speech in Berlin provided a powerful statement of the transatlantic alliance as he identified himself as a Berliner. The relationship between the US, Europe, and China today is different than the relationship between the West and the Soviets during the Cold War, which was a relationship of total estrangement with its ever-present possibility of nuclear disaster. Unlike their relationship with the Soviets, the US and Europe have robust commercial relationships with China. China has a large economy, and it has become Europe's largest trading partner, at least last year. And the US slipped to second, although the US still imports more goods from Europe than China. Europe does not have the same military interests as the United States in dealing with China. So Europe and the US are not completely aligned with respect to China. Despite its historic ties with the US and its NATO partnership, Europe does not want to have to be forced into a choice between the United States and China. Europe has powerful commercial interests with China, and it wants to partner with China on common interests like climate change or pandemics and that sort of thing. Since the pandemic, Europe has become more concerned about China, and particularly its failure to adhere to international standards on human rights. In May of 2020, the European Union and China entered a comprehensive agreement on investment, subject to the approval of the EU Parliament. After 7 years and 35 negotiating sessions, the deal gave Europe unprecedented access to China's markets. China acquiesced to Europe's demands in an attempt to pull China closer to its sphere of influence before the new Biden administration could pull Europe away. Europe had previously developed a three-pronged approach to China as a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival. It hoped it could put blinders on, keeping its concerns about human rights in China from interfering with its economic relations in China. But China took offense at the three-part scheme. It sought a relationship based on mutual benefit, with neither side interfering with the internal affairs of the other. When the EU sanctioned certain Chinese officials for their treatment of the Uyghurs in China, China then retaliated and sanctioned several EU officials. Despite the advantages the investment agreement would have given Europe, the EU Parliament decided not to open debate on the agreement until China rescinded sanctions. And with public opinion moving against China, it's unlikely that debate will be opened anytime soon. And they have not rescinded their action. In the middle of September, the EU announced a new strategy to increase its presence in the Indo-Pacific region and to counter China's rising power, including a pledge to do a trade deal with Taiwan and display more ships in the South China Sea and forge deeper ties with India, Japan, Australia, and Taiwan. So just a few concluding observations. First, China has forced the US and Europe to rethink their industrial policy to compete with a country that is investing in innovation. The West may have to invest as well. We will likely see more government investment in the same high-tech areas that China identified in its China 2025 plan. Second, Trump opposed alliances and went it alone on China, using tariffs as a tool to attempt to force China to comply with tech transfer and to increase their imports from the US. But that strategy largely did not work, and it hurt farmers and others who export to China and tax the American consumer without really change in China's policy. The US and Europe realized this, and they realized that alliances are necessary. The US has moved forward with the so-called Quad. That's the four countries, US, India, Japan, and Australia. And it holds out the possibility of adding South Korea, New Zealand, and Vietnam. And if it can bring the EU in as well, it will bring the democratic countries together to be a force to counter China, but to do more than that. But such an alliance has limitations. China has become the largest trading partner of every East Asian country and many other countries outside the region. The Democratic Alliance ought not to aim at ending the relationship with China, but only to check aggression and preserve the international order. It may be ironic that China, that if such an alliance was able to be created, it would push China perhaps closer to Russia. And recall that Nixon and Kissinger, their original intent in opening China was to peel it away from the Soviets. So it's ironic that we may be pushing the two back together. The US, China, and Europe relationship may be strained today, but ultimately, these the three largest economies in the world, must work together to address the problems of the world. The biggest challenge will be for them to recognize their responsibility to solve worldwide problems, which can only be resolved through cooperation with these three large economies. And let me just give you 10 issues that require cooperation, international institutions, and norms that the US, China, Europe, and China should be working together to address. First is climate change. Second, human migration. Third, failed states and their endless wars and stateless terrorism. Pandemics and other diseases, financial crises, supply chain disruptions, cybersecurity, inequality, nuclear proliferation, and the disruption that will inevitably come from artificial intelligence and biotech innovation. It is in the self-interest of all three to address these global issues and to foster partnerships and tamp down their adversarial relationship. If the US, China, and the EU come together to see these major issues as not only their responsibility to the world, but also in their own self-interest, and working together, hopefully they will keep their antagonisms at bay. So that covers a lot of ground, and I hope that was helpful to you, and I enjoyed being with you to do that. Now I will entertain any comments or questions that you may have.
Dr. McDonnell, some questions were put into the chat. Here's, I don't know if you can access them, but the first one says Europe has become the top big tech regulator in favor of society and competition, all while Facebook is in the news for its ill effects on US society, young people, fake news, threat to democracy, divisiveness, etc. Can you imagine any circumstance under which we would follow suit?
Yes, absolutely. I think that the Europeans are ahead. The US is waking up to the problem, and I think I could see the Europeans taking the lead, and certainly having us join with the Europeans. I mean, the announcement that they just made last week, I mean, one of those issues was to address these big tech companies that just have too much power. And our concern, I mean, economic power is one thing, but they just have too much power over society, over public opinion, over misinformation. You know, that being said, it's the solutions are not easy, and but Europe has done a better job than we have. So I think we will, as we look to tackle this problem, we will join with them.
Okay, thank you. We have a second question. How would you advise President Biden to repair the AUKUS, A-U-K-U-S situation?
Yeah,
It
AUKUS.
seems,
AUKUS is that's the deal that the U.S., Australia, and Great Britain entered into to build these nuclear submarines to counter China in the South China Sea, and France. They did not bring France into that discussion, and France had the agreement with Australia to build conventional nuclear subs. And certainly in hindsight, that really looked like a misstep of why we would have not told France ahead of time what we were going to do. I have not heard a good explanation for that, other than that the U.S. looked to Australia, since it was an arrangement with Australia, to handle that, but the consequences really come back to the U.S. I mean, Secretary Blinken was over in France trying to repair that relationship. I mean, I think that on that specifically, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't bring France in. France has an interest in more than any other European country in that part of the world. They have some French citizens and provinces there, and this agreement that Europe came forward with, which was almost simultaneous with the AUKUS announcement about beefing up their presence in the Indo-Pacific region, is something that we should embrace. So, yeah, we just have some diplomatic work to do, but I would say we should be, we should be bringing them in. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know the specifics of how we do that, but even if we shared some of the revenue, I'm not sure even if it was revenue or just a disappointment, a snub, or whether this was really internal French politics. I mean, he's running for, Macron is running for election, and making a big deal of this, it probably was a good thing for him. So I don't know if I have the exact answer, but it is something that we have to do to repair that relationship.
Thank you. We have another question. China's infrastructure initiatives, Belt and Road, in Europe will leave some in overwhelming debt to China, for example, Montenegro. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, this is this is a problem for the countries that have entered into these deals with China, and so I don't know. I mean, a number of countries in Central Europe have been beneficiaries, if you want to look at it that way, but it has left them with too much debt, and it has, in some cases, they have had to give up significant assets that China was able to possess because they could not pay back the loans. This is something that, frankly, the U.S. and Europe should be making investments in these countries on more favorable terms. It is in our interest to have these countries in our orbit rather than in China's orbit. So, this it's unfortunate for these countries, but it may not really help China in developing its good relationships and its orbit extension.
Okay, thank you. We have another question posed via the chat. With respect to world opinion of China being quite low at present, it seems as though China has historically not cared too much about what the world thinks of it and its policies. China is quite thin-skinned and reacts very strongly in offended tones whenever its record on human rights or trade is questioned. Has Chinese leadership shown any willingness to change its attitude and do more to court a higher opinion from other countries?
Not that I am aware of. It has been able to use its economic power, its ability to export at a good price and import and allow business to come into China, and has kept and has viewed its internal issues as something that is nobody else's business. Now, to some extent, it's really gotten away with it. I mean, look at it's our largest trading partner. It's Europe's largest trading partner. It's Japan's largest trading partner. Nobody is holding their feet to the fire and saying, we're not going to do this. We're not going to accept your products until you change. But it seems to me that if we come together, we would have more power. The Trump idea of doing it alone has been an experiment that failed. And I hope we've learned from it that we really do need to work together. What Europe has done on human rights in China has been bold, and it has put human rights ahead of economic interest, even though it still does a lot of importing and exporting from China. But it could have moved forward with that very advantageous deal, and it didn't. But right now, China has been willing to not allow other countries to influence its internal decisions.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any members of the audience who would like to unmute themselves and ask Dr. McDonnell a question?
Hello, Joe. This is V. Sheehan.
Oh, V.
How are you?
Okay, okay.
I wanted to ask about cooperation with China on the part of US and Europe on environmental issues. I had understood in the past that there was some forward movement on that. Is that continuing, or pretty much just staying level, or is China, it's sort of discouraging to hear that, did you say 60% of their electrical power is from coal? And that sounds as if they're not moving very fast, but I've heard other people who have been to China say that they see a lot of progress there. What's your perspective on cooperation on environmental issues between these three blocks?
Well, you know, I would say that that Europe has the strongest position on climate change. You know, we'll see what the U.S. does if Biden gets his plan through. China has interest. I mean, its environment, its own environment, is terrible, and if it wants to move towards a more consumer-oriented, service-oriented, tourist-oriented society, you know, cleaning up its own cities is in its own interest. I think it realizes that it wants to be a good environmental steward. And you're going to see in the Winter Olympics, you're going to see clean air because everything is going to be shut down. On the other hand, what China has is coal, and it has domestic coal, so it doesn't have to import coal. Nuclear takes time. It has been moving forward on the, you know, wind and solar, but coal is still its major its major source. With these shortages of energy and the spike in coal prices and the shortage of natural gas, I think China is going to continue to use coal, and it has agreed. I mean, one of the things that it was doing in the Belt and Road was building coal plants throughout these countries, which it has agreed not to do that, not to exacerbate this situation. But in terms of significant reduction, I guess I wouldn't hold my breath on that, considering what is, you know, what's going on now. It's always this struggle between its economic interests and its environmental interests, and it has interests in both, but it has not been willing thus far to sacrifice its economic interests. And it remains to be seen whether how much we are too. But it's in, I mean, its growth over the last 20 years has almost tripled the size of its energy needs. And that's something, when it comes to coal, that's a lot more coal going into the atmosphere, whereas we have significantly reduced coal because of fracking and the ability to use natural gas and the more environmental wind and solar.
Are there any other patrons who would like to ask Dr. Joe a question?
I would. This is Marcia Bond.
Hello, Marcia.
Yes, hi. Can you speak to any changes that you see in the political structure in China? Is there any weakening of the present power grid there politically, or any changes that you predict in the future?
No, I think that Xi Jinping has full control of that country, and I expect that he will get a third term. Now, of course, the steps that he's taking in slowing down the high-tech industry and trying to make it more egalitarian, and the other headwinds that China faces. I mean, if the whole thing goes south on him, the economy goes south on him, and he can't make China move forward, there might be a change of opinion. But right now, he's doing some bold things, which must mean to me that he has enough support to take those measures. To take on, he's definitely took on the tech industry. He's taking on the real estate industry. He's bringing more things under his control, and so I think he'll, unless he doesn't pull it off and everything goes bad, then of course, every leader is subject to being second guessed. But right now, I think he's firmly in power.
And then just, if I may, one other question in terms of you spoke to how unpopular a favorable opinion is from other countries. I just, when we see the pandemic and we know that that's where it came from, aren't there less repercussions than one might expect?
Repercussions on China?
Yes, toward China, because of the pandemic.
Well, China, of course, touts itself as the place that's really done a heck of a job in controlling the pandemic, and it took aggressive measures early to close its economy and test its people and quarantine its people and trace, build hospitals quickly, get supplies up. It did a lot better job than we did in that regard, and so it views itself as a success, and its economy moved forward because it controlled it in a way that we didn't. So I don't know. Even though we have negative opinions, and we know that it originated there, whether from an animal or from a lab, I'm not sure what kind of repercussions they have actually felt. It would take really some unity on the part of countries of the world to come together and say, this is what we demand, or we're not going to buy your products, or and thus far that hasn't taken place. Hasn't taken place with us, hasn't taken place in Europe, and certainly hasn't taken place in Asia. So they have problems, but it's not because the world has stopped buying their products.
Thank you, Dr. Joe. If you could advise President Biden about any action he should take or could take that would be positive in bringing the United States closer with Europe in their dealings with China, what would you encourage him or advise him?
Well, as much as possible, we want to move in lockstep with Europe, recognizing that we don't have, Europe doesn't want to be in a Cold War between the US and China. And it's not in our interest to be in a Cold War either. So I do think that the steps that are beginning to be taken are good ones in terms of dealing with China. And I just think we need to, Europe is one thing, we need to get others, we need to get Japan and South Korea and India, and, we just need to get, many more, and then see where we can get agreement. That would be the biggest thing. It just turns out that not everybody has the same interests. We tend to be a little bit more hostile because we're concerned militarily, whereas many of these other countries are not concerned militarily. But there's a whole host of interests that we could have, and so repairing the European bond is, I think very, very important to us. And certainly on human rights, we will be together. On climate change, we'll be, I think we can be together.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who has a question before we let Dr. Joe get away from us? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. Forever hold your peace.
Well, I have a question. I'm just curious, do we have a sense of how Chinese citizens perceive the US and the EU currently?
Well, so, Xi Jinping is a nationalist, and they also control the media. So I would say generally that people in China are with him, and they don't have a warm opinion of the U.S. Just because that's really been the propaganda that they've been given. Of course, we get the other propaganda against China. Although, my friends there tell me that that Trump is very popular because for those people who wanted somebody that was willing to stick the finger in the eye of China, and so there are some people, but the people I deal with at the university just may not be as representative as the people in the street who are, you know, giving quite a nationalist view of things. I mean, we look at Hong Kong and we kind of look in a negative way as to what you know, China did there, but they look at it as very positive, and they see Hong Kong as you know, these people are lawless and not doing, and that's the pitch that they have been given. So controlling the media is a very powerful thing, and being a leader who is going to raise China. And you know, this is, you know, China, as you know, was a country that felt humiliation from the West and from Japan, and the rise of China is a very proud moment for them, and Xi Jinping is leading this rise. And you know, when he says we're going to be dominant in 2035, you know, that makes people feel very good. So yeah, we have to look at it from their point of view.
Anyone else? Well, Dr. Joseph McDonnell, we consider you to be a friend of the Camden Conference. You've helped us out and given talks on our behalf numerous times, and we appreciate you spending your time with us this evening, sharing your insight, and we hope that we'll get to have you back in Rockland, maybe, and maybe live, and we can maybe go to a restaurant at some point.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you very much. And we'll be back, Em, right, on November 4th with another
Absolutely.
Camden Conference community event. Kimberly, do we know what is on for November 4th, or do you know, Em, yet?
I heard a rumor it's Bill Hall, but I don't know that that's 100% confirmed.
Okay, all right. Well, again, thank you, Dr. McDonnell. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and thank you, Em, for being our lovely host.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye now.